400 kilograms of uranium hexafluoride enriched to 60% is unaccounted for. No one knows where it is. Israel doesn't know where it is. We don't know where it is.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are plunging headfirst into, well, a real storm of conflicting claims and, frankly, a pretty startling mystery. You've got, on one hand, this assessment from a former UN weapons inspector saying Israel's recent strikes on Iran, actually a massive failure.
Right, a very strong claim.
But then you hear from Israel's former international spokesperson, Jonathan Conricus, firing back just as strongly, saying Iran's nuclear program is, quote, crippled forever. An overwhelming success, he says.
Two completely opposite takes on the same event. Striking.
Exactly. But here's where it gets really interesting and honestly quite shocking. Right in the middle of all this tension, 400 kilograms of weapons-grade uranium has, well, vanished. Disappeared.
And that's not all. You've also got leaked U.S. intelligence suggesting Iran's centrifuges. They're actually still spinning, still working.
So this isn't just another flare-up in the Middle East.
No, not at all. This feels different. This could be, a real pivotal moment. It could genuinely swing things towards, well, either nuclear Armageddon or maybe, just maybe, some kind of unprecedented peace deal. It really changes the whole game.
It does. So our mission today for you listening is to unpack these completely opposing stories. We're going to guide you through the official statements, the leaked intel, the expert opinions.
Yeah, try and dissect the claims, the counterclaims.
And help you understand what this all really means for global security. Because honestly, this deep dive might just change how you see this entire conflict. We're asking, who's telling the truth? What is the real state of Iran's nuclear program today, especially with this, massive question mark of missing nuclear material hanging over everything?
Absolutely. And to really get a grip on where we are now, we probably need to start at the beginning. Yeah. Set the stage with the initial military operations that kicked all this off.
Okay, let's do that. Let's unpack it. It starts with Israel's Operation Rising Lion. This was launched back on June 12th and 13th, 2025.
Right.
And this wasn't, just a few pinprick strikes. This was big. A sweeping series of airstrikes hitting Iran's nuclear infrastructure, their ballistic missiles, air defenses, even senior military leaders were targeted.
This clearly designed as a major blow, comprehensive.
Yeah, multi-pronged.
Yeah.
Aimed at being decisive.
Exactly. And the strategic thinking behind it. Looking at what Israeli sources and analysts say from places like Brookings or CFR were saying, the goal was crystal clear.
Which was?
To significantly degrade Iran's military power. Not just their direct forces, but crucially, their whole regional proxy network too. Groups like Hezbollah, the Houthis. They wanted to cut off Iran's ability to project power that way.
So more than just a temporary disruption.
Oh yeah. The aim seemed to be a permanent reduction in Iran's threat capacity. There was even one opinion piece suggesting Israel felt it achieved, quote, overwhelming success at the tactical, operational, and strategic levels, framed as a game changer.
Okay, so Israel declares this huge success with Rising Lion. But then the U.S. gets involved.
Right, which wasn't the initial message.
No. President Trump first said the U.S. wasn't involved in Israel's strikes. But then, just hours before the U.S. launched its own operation, he told ABC something like, well, we weren't involved in Israel's actions, but possible we could get involved.
Setting the stage, yeah.
And then came Operation Midnight Hammer, June 21st. A 37-hour operation, and this was serious hardware. We're talking 7 B-2 stealth bombers.
Flying radio silent all the way from Missouri. That's incredible range.
Incredible. Deploying bunker busters, specialized bombs to hit deep underground targets, and using Tomahawk missiles as decoys. The B-2s, they're built for exactly this kind of thing, right? Hitting fortified underground sites.
Absolutely. Their deployment sends a very clear signal about targeting those hardened facilities. And after the mission, President Trump didn't mince words.
No, he declared it a complete success, said Iran's nuclear program has been completely and totally obliterated. Pretty definitive language.
It's very definitive. And Secretary of State Marco Rubio backed that up. He confirmed the Pentagon called the U.S. strikes a success too, and he framed it within this idea of a realist foreign policy.
What did he mean by that?
Well, as Rubio explained it, this approach seeks decisive outcomes. Get in, achieve the objective, get out. Avoid getting stuck in endless conflicts. He even pointed to earlier strikes against the Houthis in Yemen, over 1,100 precision strikes, which, he argued, led them to stop attacking ships. A similar model. Swift, decisive action.
So the idea is neutralize the threat, protect U.S. interests, act decisively, maybe even unilaterally if needed.
That seems to be the core of it, yes. Prioritizing direct action for immediate results.
It's quite a rapid shift, though, isn't it? From not involved to direct strikes to completely obliterated in, what, a week?
It is. It happened very fast.
What kind of message does that send about, the threshold for U.S. intervention? Does it suggest a lower bar now? Quick, decisive action is the new norm.
It certainly suggests a willingness to act quickly and forcefully when U.S. interests are perceived to be on the line, even if it means shifting position rapidly. This decisive outcomes model, it signals that military force is, well, very much on the table, and the focus is on immediate tangible results.
But does it risk, blowback, longer-term instability? Or is it seen as just more effective?
That's the debate, isn't it? It's a calculated risk. You prioritize speed and perceived effectiveness, perhaps over building broader consensus or tackling root causes, which, as you say, could potentially create new problems later on. But the immediate goal is achieved from their perspective.
So after both operations, you had this unified front, Israel, the U.S. official statements, all hammering home the success, the decisive impact. The narrative was threat neutralized, program gone, victory achieved.
Absolutely. And those declarations, they serve a clear purpose. They're aimed at shaping public opinion, projecting strength, reassuring allies, deterring enemies.
Managing the narrative.
Exactly. Presenting this clear, triumphant story. But, and this is a huge but, that narrative of total success almost immediately ran into some serious counterarguments. Conflicting intelligence started bubbling up right away, sowing doubt.
Right, here's where it gets really murky. This is the who's telling the truth part. Because despite obliterated and overwhelming success, you had a CNN report citing U.S. intelligence sources. That painted a completely different picture. Their assessment, Iran was not actively building a bomb. Still maybe 3 years away.
3 years versus obliterated. That's kind of gap.
It's huge. And worse, according to these CNN sources, these massive Israeli and U.S. strikes, they only set Iran's program back by maybe a few months.
A few months? That's hardly crippled forever, is it? It sounds more like, well, speed bump, a temporary setback.
What a massive contradiction. And then you had that reported flip-flop from the DNI, Tulsi Gabbard.
Yeah, that was concerning. Initially telling Congress Iran wasn't actively pursuing weapons. Then, very quickly, apparently after President Trump called her assessment wrong publicly.
On a Saturday, the report said.
Right. She suddenly shifts to saying Iran could produce nukes within weeks.
Weeks. From not pursuing to weeks away. That kind of whiplash, especially when it seems linked to political pressure.
It creates immediate doubt, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It reminds people inevitably of past intelligence controversies. Think Iraq WMDs. When intelligence assessments seem to shift based on political winds, public trust just evaporates.
Right.
It makes it incredibly hard to know what's really going on.
And that history, that public memory of feeling misled, it hangs over everything now. People hear these official statements, and there's this instant skepticism, this Iraq WMDs anyone reaction. It makes it tough to accept any claim at face value.
It's a huge challenge for governments. That background skepticism filters every new piece of information. And it wasn't just leaks causing doubt. The IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, the UN's nuclear watchdog, they put out a report mid-June 2025.
Right in their assessment.
Much more nuanced, much more detailed, and frankly, quite alarming in its own way. It directly challenged that total obliteration idea.
Okay, so what did the IAEA find? Let's break it down.
Right. Looking at the specifics is crucial. Take Natanz, one of the main enrichment sites.
Okay.
The above-ground pilot fuel enrichment plant. This was where they were enriching up to 60%, which is very close to weapons grade that was destroyed. And there was a localized radiological release contained to the site, but still serious.
So some success there, but contain the damage.
Yes, but the report indicates the main, much larger underground fuel enrichment plant, it might have only been penetrated, not destroyed.
Penetrated, meaning?
Meaning the bombs might have reached it, but not necessarily obliterated everything inside. The damage to the centrifuges, the machines that enrich uranium, might have actually come from power loss, or maybe shock waves from the impact nearby, rather than the bombs directly destroying them.
Okay, that's a big difference.
It is. And here's the real kicker, the really worrying part from Natanz. There was an unnamed underground enrichment facility that was still under construction.
Yes.
It remained undamaged. completely untouched by the strikes.
An undamaged, potentially secret facility, and another main one only penetrated, maybe just suffering power loss.
Exact.
That doesn't sound like completely and totally obliterated at all, it sounds like.
Well,
like the program is damaged but still functional, maybe even with hidden parts intact?
Precisely. It suggests resilience, maybe even redundancy that wasn't fully appreciated. Then you look at Fordo, another key underground site, heavily fortified.
What happened there?
Initially, it was apparently undamaged by Israel's June 13th strikes. So the U.S. targeted it specifically on June 21st with those bunker busters.
Okay.
And they caused damage, yes. The massive ordnance penetrators definitely hit home. But, and this is critical, the IAEA report explicitly states, Fordo continues to enrich uranium up to 60%.
It's still running, even after being hit by bunker busters.
Apparently so.
Yeah.
Still enriching to that very high, near weapons grade level. So the overall IAEA assessment acknowledges significant damage across the board, but, and it's a crucial pale, but key components remain intact or are under repair.
Intact or under repair, still enriching at Fordo. An undamaged underground facility elsewhere.
Yes. And while the IAEA confirmed past undeclared activities related to weaponization before 2003, they found no ongoing covert weapon program at the time of their last verified inspections just before the conflict.
So putting it all together, despite these huge military operations, the IAEA suggests Iran is still enriching, even accelerating enrichment towards weapons-grade levels at places like Fordo.
That's the assessment, and that fact alone, the continued high-level enrichment, dramatically increases the proliferation risks.
And then there's the inspection issue. The IAEA can't get in anymore. Iran suspended inspections, passed laws limiting cooperation.
Which just adds layers of uncertainty. If the watchdog can't watch, then who really knows what's happening right now? It makes assessing the true state of the program incredibly difficult, and the risks just shoot up.
So if centrifuges are spinning, key facilities are working or being fixed, it really forces the question, was this a massive failure like the former UN inspector claimed, or just a temporary setback for Iran?
It certainly casts serious doubt on the crippled forever narrative. It suggests military strikes alone might not be enough to stop a determined, resilient program with potentially hidden depths. It might even, paradoxically, push them harder.
And some are taking it even further, arguing that Iran, in a way, actually won, or at least wasn't really defeated.
Yeah, that's a perspective you hear. The argument is that despite sanctions, despite internal discontent, the Islamic Republic still holds a degree of legitimacy at home.
And that the attacks might have strengthened it.
Paradoxically, yes. The idea is that joint U.S.-Israeli aggression kind of rallied people, even disillusioned Iranians who might look towards the West. It fosters a nationalist circle-the-wagons mentality.
There was that quote you mentioned earlier.
Right, an Iranian saying Iran's biggest achievement or gift wasn't on the battlefield, but at home amongst the people, becoming as one. It suggests external pressure can sometimes suppress internal dissent, make it seem unpatriotic, and actually bolster the hardliners.
Which is ironic, given Israel's stated fear isn't just a nuclear Iran, but a sovereign Iran supporting resistance. Some link that fear to past interventions in Iraq, Libya, Syria, where attempts to force change led to chaos.
It's a complex dynamic. And Iran didn't just sit there, they hit back directly.
Yeah, launching missiles, drones at Israel, some got through, hit cities, caused real damage. That felt like a major shift.
It absolutely was.
Yeah.
Moving from relying on proxies to direct state-on-state attacks, that's a whole new level of conflict. The shadow war is out in the open now.
So you have these completely conflicting takes on the outcomes, success versus failure, strengthened versus weakened. And all of this leads us to the most alarming piece of the puzzle.
The vanishing uranium.
The vanishing 400 kilograms of highly enriched uranium. This is where it gets, frankly, terrifying on a global scale.
It really does. The IAEA, just days before the conflict kicked off, had verified Iran had a stockpile of more than 400 kilograms of this HEU.
God, now.
Now, because inspections are suspended, verifying that stockpile, it's just not possible. It's unaccounted for.
400 kilograms. What does that actually mean in practical terms? How dangerous is that amount?
It's profoundly dangerous. It's a significant quantity of weapon-grade material, more than enough to potentially build an improvised nuclear device, an IND. A crude bomb may be built from scratch using this material.
And the main thing stopping nuclear terrorism is getting the material, right?
Exactly. Access to weapon-grade material like HEU is the biggest hurdle for rogue states or non-state actors. So having this much material suddenly off the books unverified, it implies a critical failure in accountability. It represents a severe, immediate threat, The possibility alone is a nightmare scenario.
Has anything like this happened before, uranium going missing?
Well, there's a historical shadow here. The Apollo affair, or the UAMAC incident back in the 60s in the U.S., highly enriched uranium went missing from a processing plant in Pennsylvania.
Really?
Yeah, and there have always been suspicions, though never definitively proven in public, that some of it might have been diverted and potentially aided Israel's early nuclear weapons program. It shows that even in supposedly secure systems, large amounts of nuclear material can become unaccounted for. It's not unprecedented.
So how is this stuff normally tracked? There must be systems.
Oh, absolutely. In the U.S., the NRC requires strict material control and accounting MC&A programs, rigorous tracking, physical inventory, seals, surveillance, all combined with physical protection, guards, vaults, fences. It's designed specifically to prevent theft or diversion.
So the fact that 400 kilograms in Iran is now unverified.
It points to a major breakdown, whether it was diverted, destroyed in the strikes and impossible to account for, or just untraceable because the inspectors are locked out. The result is the same. A terrifying gap in our knowledge. A huge amount of dangerous material is simply .status unknown.
And you see the public reaction online, places like Reddit. People immediately jump to dirty bombs.
It's an understandable fear. But technically, uranium, especially HEU, isn't the ideal material for a classic dirty bomb meant to spread radiation over a wide area.
Why not?
It's primarily an alpha emitter. Alpha particles don't travel far, can't penetrate skin. The danger is mainly if you inhale or ingest it. Other isotopes like cobalt-60 or cesium-137, which emit penetrating gamma rays, are generally considered more dangerous for that kind of contamination weapon.
Okay.
But, and this is crucial, we're talking about highly enriched uranium, 60% pure. This stuff is incredibly valuable, intended for weapons. The idea that any of it could be missing and potentially misused, even in a less than optimal dirty bomb, it's still horrifying. Not necessarily for mass casualties from radiation, but the panic, the economic chaos, the psychological terror it would cause. Immense.
So even if it's not the best dirty bomb material, the fact that it's HEU and it's missing is the critical danger.
Precisely. The psychological impact alone, the fear and mistrust it generates globally, is a massive problem, regardless of the specific technical threat.
Which brings us back again to that public skepticism. The Iraq WMD's Anyone comments. People remembering past instances where they felt intelligence was manipulated or just plain wrong.
Exactly. That perception of conscious lies perpetrated by the powers that be, as the outline put it, it colors everything. When you hear about missing uranium and conflicting intelligence reports and remember Iraq, well, it's hard for people to trust official statements.
It makes discerning truth from spin almost impossible for the average person.
It's a real crisis of credibility, which makes it even more important to look at what specific experts, people who've been involved or are watching closely, are saying. Their perspectives, even when they clash, can offer valuable insights.
Okay, let's turn to one of those key voices. Jonathan Conricus, the former IDF international spokesperson, he gives that direct Israeli military perspective.
Yeah, Conricus provides a really important window into the Israeli mindset and strategic thinking. He talked about the IDF telling the government they could pause operations briefly for hostage rescues, but then had to continue to a clear victory in Gaza.
Why?
To serve as a lesson for our enemies. It highlights that for Israel, this isn't just about Hamas, it's about regional deterrence, sending a message. He also spoke very frankly about feeling isolated.
How so?
Saying Israel is fighting alone, feeling kind of cornered, watching allies waffle, waver, or even turn, while feeling surrounded by what he calls Iranian terror organizations. That sense of siege, of existential threat, you can hear it clearly. It definitely drives their actions.
And he defended specific controversial operations too, didn't he? Like the hostage rescues from civilian apartments.
He did. He pushed back hard against criticism, emphasizing that in some cases, Gazan civilians were holding hostages. He even named an Al Jazeera journalist and a doctor allegedly involved. He bristled at questions he deemed absurd, like the BBC asking why they didn't warn non-combatants before a sensitive hostage rescue.
His argument being that would compromise the mission.
Right. Compromise the mission, endanger the hostages. He clearly feels Israel faces unfair scrutiny, a double standard. And his vision for the future is stark.
What did he say about the day after?
He was adamant. Hamas must be defeated for any viable day after in Gaza. Without that, he argued, you'll just see continued attempts to do October the 7th again and again, and continued Gazan attempts to perform genocide against Jews in Israel. It underlines the profound security fears driving policy.
He also made that accusation against Egypt.
Yeah, claiming Egypt has, quite elaborate ties with terrorists, which, adds another layer of complexity to the whole regional picture. His whole perspective is rooted in these deep national security concerns and the perceived need for decisive, sometimes unilateral military action.
But as you said, his view, while important coming from an IDF insider, is just one piece of the puzzle. There are strong counter-arguments about Iranian intentions, the regional situation, a whole different narrative.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's where the debate gets really fierce. For example, Prime Minister Netanyahu called for Iranians to overthrow their government, hinting at regime change.
But is that realistic?
Well, experts point out the Iranian opposition is diverse and largely fractured. There isn't a unified movement ready to take over. And crucially, trying to foment an uprising during wartime when the country is under attack, that often backfires.
How so?
He can be seen as unpatriotic. People might rally around the existing government, even if they don't like it, against the external enemy. It can actually strengthen hardliners. Remember that quote, "Aggression made the people become as one." So the regime change strategy might be counterproductive.
And then there's the whole history of the nuclear claims that Iran is 2 weeks away line.
Right. That claim has been floating around since, 1995? Decades.
It does strain credibility, doesn't it, after hearing that for so long?
It absolutely fuels the skepticism we talked about. The counter-argument is that Iran doesn't necessarily want to bomb tomorrow to use it. They know that would be suicide, inviting obliteration.
So why pursue the capability?
For parity with Israel, which has undeclared nukes, as a deterrent. And importantly, to eke out concessions from the global community. It's a bargaining chip, a symbol of power and sovereignty, maybe more than a weapon they intend to fire.
There's also the argument that Israel provoked this round.
Yes, that view is definitely out there. Pointing to alleged assassinations, cyber attacks by Israel against Iran for months before these big strikes, creating a context where Iran felt it had to develop a stronger deterrent. And tied into that is the perceived double standard.
The Israeli nuclear program.
Exactly. The argument goes, everyone knows Israel has nukes, and that's why nobody else in the region can have nuclear tech. This fuels Iranian determination not to be denied the same capabilities.
And what about the impact on Israel itself? There was that Al Jazeera opinion piece.
Right, arguing that Netanyahu's actions, especially in Gaza, the huge reported death toll, over 56,000 Palestinians, his ICC indictment for alleged war crimes, have actually weakened Israel's long-term standing, increase its international isolation.
So a tactical win could be a strategic loss.
That's the argument. It paints a picture not of overwhelming success, but potentially of Pyrrhic victory, where the costs, diplomatic, moral, long-term security outweigh the immediate military gains. It shows just how complex this is, moving beyond simple win-lose narratives.
It really underscores the deep geopolitical currents, the historical baggage, the internal dynamics on all sides, which forces us to look at the bigger picture. The risk of escalation, the state of global arms control. Are we on a dangerous path?
It certainly feels like it, and it brings concepts from nuclear strategy into sharp focus, like brinkmanship.
Explain that again.
It's where a country deliberately increases the risk of nuclear war, not necessarily threatening to launch first, but maybe putting forces on hair trigger alert, making things less stable to scare the opponent into backing down. It's playing chicken with Armageddon.
A terrifying game.
And the Stuxnet cyber attack on Iran years ago showed us something else critical. Nuclear facilities, even supposedly secure, air-gapped ones cut off from the internet, are vulnerable. Cyber warfare adds this whole other layer of risk and instability.
And things like high alert status or launch on warning.
They drastically cut down decision time in a crisis. If you're poised to launch based on potentially ambiguous warning signals, the risk of a catastrophic mistake, a miscalculation, a technical glitch goes way up. That's why things like limiting the number and locations of nuclear weapons are seen as vital risk reduction measures. Give leaders more time to think.
So, with Iran enriching closer to weapons grade, with 400 kilograms of HEU potentially missing, with all this uncertainty, are we getting closer to that nightmare use them or lose them scenario, where one side feels forced to strike first?
The risk is undeniably higher. The ambiguity, the mistrust, the shortened decision times. It's a dangerous mix. And this isn't happening in isolation. Look at the global picture. The whole arms control framework seems to be crumbling. Well, the U.S. pulled out of the Arms Trade Treaty, regulating conventional weapons trade. Pulled out of the Open Skies Treaty for surveillance flights. Russia pulled out of the Conventional Armed Forces in Europe Treaty, suspended participation in New START, the last big U.S.-Russia nuclear treaty.
So the guardrails are coming off.
It feels that way. These agreements were built to create transparency, build confidence, reduce risks. As they fall apart, there are fewer diplomatic tools, fewer safety nets to manage crises like this one with Iran. The potential for miscalculation just grows.
Which brings us to that ultimate question you posed earlier. Is this heading towards a grand bargain or nuclear Armageddon?
It feels like we're at a crossroads. You have the America First decisive action approach, which prioritizes immediate U.S. interests. But critics argue that approach risks sacrificing long-term alliances and partnerships.
Which are arguably a major U.S. strength.
Exactly. Undermining those could be strategically costly in the long run. Meanwhile, diplomatic efforts with Iran seem incredibly fragile right now. IAEA inspections are suspended, the nuclear program's opaque.
And even efforts to hold Iran accountable, like censure at the IAEA, could backfire and kill diplomacy altogether.
It's a tightrope walk. Accountability versus engagement. And all this requires hard choices, especially when resources are tight, public patience is thin. Is the current path sustainable, or does it lead inevitably towards catastrophe? Or could the sheer danger, the immense costs and risks for everyone involved actually force a rethink? Push towards some kind of unprecedented peace deal simply because the alternative is unthinkable.
And you have all the other players in the region too, Lebanon, Syria, the Houthis. They could all throw a wrench in the works or be part of a solution.
Their actions absolutely factor into the larger equation. They can escalate or de-escalate tensions significantly.
So we've covered a lot of ground: conflicting intelligence, clashing strategies, a potential catastrophe with missing nuclear material. The simple question of did Israel win or is Iran more dangerous now seems almost impossible to answer definitively.
It really does. It's deeply contested, obscured by that missing uranium, by the fog of war, by narratives shaped for political ends. Victory itself seems like a very ambiguous concept here.
Which leaves us, and you listening, with a final thought. Given these starkly conflicting stories from officials, from intelligence leaks, given the chilling mystery of 400 kilograms of weapons-grade uranium off the map, given the history of intelligence failures and controversies, how much confidence can you really place in any official declaration about nuclear programs right now?
And what does victory even mean in a conflict clouded by such profound uncertainty, where the stakes are this high and where the truth itself often feels like the first casualty?